Praised be Jesus and Mary. The last way in which our Blessed Mother appeared at Fatima on the 13th of October in 1917 was as Our Lady of Carmel. In her memoirs, Sister Lucia does not elaborate on the appearance of Our Lady of Carmel that day, so we can suppose that she appeared as she is usually depicted in art. And in paintings and sculptures, Our Lady of Carmel is generally shown holding the infant Jesus in her left arm, while with her right she extends toward us the brown scapular. Or sometimes Jesus too is extending the scapular to us, or at other times it is only Jesus who is offering us the scapular and not Our Lady. But in any case, the statue or the painting of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is making a clear invitation to us to receive the scapular, to wear the scapular. And so this invitation is an important invitation of Fatima. You could almost say it's one of the calls of Fatima, although I don't think Sister Lucia mentions it expressly as one of the calls. But no, so this could be, moreover, this is the last apparition of Fatima, the very, very last thing that happens. So you could take it as a piece of parting advice. Wear the scapular. So the message of Fatima essentially is a problem and a solution. The problem that it points out to us is that God's commandments are not being respected, which has the consequence of hell for individuals and the consequence of war for societies. The solution is devotion to Mary's Immaculate Heart, both for one's own salvation and sanctification and for the conversion of poor sinners, which will prevent war. Each of these has many nuances, many things that we could say about it, but at the moment we want to see how the brown scapular fits into this general scheme. It relates, of course, to the problem of individuals avoiding hell, since the promise of the scapular is that anyone who dies wearing it will not suffer eternal fire. And we must understand that wearing the scapular is an expression of devotion to Mary, and in the context of Fatima, we could even say devotion to her Immaculate Heart. This is how we can answer an objection to the scapular devotion. To non-Catholics, and even to some Catholics who hear about this, it seems to be a sort of superstition, some kind of magic. After all, the scapular is only two little rectangles of cloth, maybe an inch or two on a side, and connected so that they can be worn one on the chest and the other on the back. So how can a couple of tiny scraps of cloth save anyone from hell? Our Savior is Jesus. It seems to be some sort of talisman. We see talismans, magic in various cultures around the world. It seems that this is nothing more than that. The answer is that it is not merely wearing these bits of cloth that saves us. No, it isn't the cloth that saves us directly. That would indeed be magic. It is the fact that these pieces of cloth express an interior devotion, a desire to place oneself under Our Lady's protection. And this desire to be protected by Our Lady of Mount Carmel is not in vain, for she has promised her assistance to those who wear the scapular. We escape hell, of course, only by the grace of God, which comes to us through the Blessed Virgin. So what is this promise that was given to St. Simon Stock? We find it recorded for the first time, at least in the records that survive, in the 14th century catalogue of saints of the Carmelite order, which gives a brief description, a brief life of all of the saints of the Carmelite order at that time. And there we read this: St. Simon of England continually besought the most glorious Mother of God to defend with a privilege the order of Carmelites, which enjoys the special title of the Virgin. He prayed devoutly, "Flower of Carmel, vine blossom laden, splendor of heaven, childbearing maiden, none equals thee. O Mother benign, whom no man didst know, on all Carmel's children thy favors bestow, star of the sea." The Blessed Virgin appeared to him with a multitude of angels, holding in her blessed hands the scapular of the order. She said, "This will be for you and for all Carmelites the privilege, that he who dies in this will not suffer eternal fire. That is, he who dies in this will be saved." Now, because this was written in the 14th century, as soon as people started to be critical about history and to doubt things, this was written in the 14th century, and St. Simon Stock lived in the 13th century, people have called into doubt the historical accuracy of this apparition. Why don't we have any record of it from the 13th century? Why didn't anyone write about it during the life of St. Simon Stock? And the answer to that scholars have is really very simple, that the Carmelites were not writing much of anything in the 13th century. It was really only in the 14th century that the Carmelite literature begins to flourish. This is the very first catalogue of saints they produced. So as soon as the Carmelites began to write, they were writing about this. As soon as someone wrote the life of St. Simon Stock, for this is, in fact, the very oldest life of St. Simon Stock, which is hardly a page long, it contains the account of this apparition. And if you could even imagine that the first life of St. Simon Stock could perfectly well not mention this apparition, but mention other things in his life. Perhaps then we would have some reason to doubt it. But since the very earliest life of St. Simon mentions this apparition as essentially the most important thing in his life, we see that there is a very old tradition connected with this. Not only that, but this very brief life also gives us this prayer or poem or antiphon, Flos Carmeli, flower of Carmel. And so we see that not only was there this tradition already in the 14th century that indeed Our Lady had appeared to St. Simon Stock and given him, showed him the scapular, given him the promise that the scapular would, no one who died wearing it would suffer eternal fire. That Carmelites, beyond this, in addition to this, we see that they had this devotion, this is associated with the promise, that poem included in the narrative. So there was already a fully formed tradition regarding the apparition, just 100 years after the death of St. Simon. And then even still, when historians look at the reliability of something, they say, well, is there any reason why someone would make this up? Why, what benefit would they get out of it? Well, some people have thought and have said that the Carmelites made up this story in order to convince the laity to wear the scapular, to promote it. But the reality is that the laity were not wearing the scapular when this was written, and weren't wearing it in the century afterwards either. So in the 13th and 14th century, it was only the friars and the nuns who were wearing the Carmelite scapular. And so that argument against the authenticity of the scapular falls too. So the scholars go on and answer many other arguments as well, but since this is a sermon and not we don't need to go through all of the history. All right, so Our Lady said, "This will be for you and for all Carmelites the privilege, that he who dies in this will not suffer eternal fire." So, initially it was, as I said, the Carmelites who were wearing it. And even when the first Carmelite tertiaries began to receive the Carmelite habit, they weren't given the scapular at first. They were given a mantle, being placed under Our Lady's mantle, which was a common thing also for some other tertiaries. Perhaps you remember that St. Catherine of Siena had a mantle to signify that she was a Dominican tertiary. And then later on they began to give them the scapular instead of the mantle. So in the 15th century, in connection with the sabbatine privilege, the laity began asking in greater numbers, especially towards the end of that century, to receive the scapular. And then in the following 2 centuries, popes repeatedly wrote in favor of this privilege, and the scapular became quite widespread among the laity. Because the scapular was, in those centuries of controversy between Catholics and Protestants, something quintessentially Catholic, because it involved a belief in purgatory, a belief that Our Lady can help us, and all of this was the first thing to be attacked by someone who was attacking Catholic doctrine, and of course the first thing to be defended by the popes defending it. So what is the Sabbatine privilege? It's a promise of rapid liberation from purgatory for those who fulfill additional conditions besides wearing the scapular, for those who aren't just doing the minimum, but who are really trying to live devotion to Our Lady. And it was originally associated with the supposed bull of Pope John the 22nd, so that would be from the 13th century, or the 14th century rather. But that bull, unfortunately, does not seem to be authentic. So we can instead see the origin of the Sabbatine privilege not in an apparition to John the 22nd, but in a deeper understanding of the original scapular promise. For Our Lady can and will assist those particularly devoted to her, not only to escape hell, but also to be rapidly delivered from purgatory. And to show that the Sabbatine privilege doesn't depend on that bull, we can look at a decree of the Holy Office, which in 1613, there's a decree that makes no reference to that bull, and that permits the Carmelites to preach the Sabbatine privilege, namely that through her continuous intercession, pious suffrages, merits, and special protection, I'm quoting the decree now, the Most Blessed Virgin, especially on Saturday, the day dedicated to her by the Church, will help after their death the brethren and members of the sodality of the Blessed Virgin of Carmel, who die in charity, that is, who die in the grace of God. In life, they must have worn the habit, observed chastity according to their estate, and have recited the little office. If they do not know how to recite it, they are to observe the fasts of the Church and to abstain from meat on Wednesdays and Saturdays, except for the feast of Christmas. So there's the three conditions: wear the habit, observe chastity, and recite, and then a particular act of devotion to Our Lady, which was praying the little office of Our Lady, which for centuries was said by religious and by laymen. If you see those medieval books of hours, that's what that is. But now it's much less common to say it. Now, in the past, the difficulty was that you had to know how to read and read Latin, and not everyone did. So the others would fast on Wednesdays and Saturdays. But today, because neither is the little office all that common, nor do people find it easy to fast twice a week, you can ask your confessor to commute the condition, to change the condition, to give you some other prayer or works to do in place of that. And so, the habit that the privilege is talking about, or that the decree is talking about, is of course the scapular, which is the most notable part of the Carmelite habit, such that even in the 13th century, habit and scapular were synonymous for Carmelites. By wearing this habit, one expresses an association with Carmel, because in fact some association with Carmel, some connection is necessary in order for Our Lady's promise to apply, for she said, it is a privilege for all Carmelites, so you have to in some way be a Carmelite. But that connection can be in various degrees. It can be a friar or nun, it could be a tertiary, it could be a member of the confraternity of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, it could even just be being committed to put into practice the Marian characteristic of Carmelite spirituality, wholly and fervently. And like any habit, it is enough to receive it once. When friars and nuns get a new habit because the old one has worn out, they don't go through the ceremony of receiving the habit all over again. So if you replace your scapular, you don't need to come up and shouldn't come up to receive the scapular again. You just replace it, perhaps asking a priest to bless it, although that's not strictly necessary. And also, thanks to Pope Pius XII, you can also, instead of a scapular, if you find it difficult for whatever reason, replace it with a medal that has, if I'm not mistaken, check this, but the Sacred Heart on one side and Our Lady on the other. But there are particular medals that are intended to replace the scapular. And so, and that, of course, we can do because it's a symbol, it's a habit. It's not something that has power in itself. It's not a talisman, but it's a symbol that has a twofold meaning. So on the one hand, it symbolizes our recognition of Mary's spiritual maternity. And then in relation to oneself, to the person wearing it, it symbolizes an acceptance of one's spiritual obligations as a child of Mary. So it's both a request for help and a recognition of one's own obligations, which for a layman, those obligations are the observance of God's law, summarized in the Ten Commandments, daily prayer, attendance at Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, reception of the sacraments of penance and the Eucharist, and the fulfillment of one's duties of state. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that others don't do, well, at least if they're good Christians. But by doing this, we say, I want Our Lady's help, I want your help, Mother Mary, in order that I may be a good Christian, that I may be a good disciple of our Lord. So the scapular isn't a magic way of obtaining salvation, whatever you do. You can't, put on a scapular and then go on a rampage and expect to get into heaven. But it's an extra help for those who have a sincere desire to serve God, but are also very aware of their own weakness, perhaps especially if they've had a past life of sin and had a difficult conversion had a conversion and recognize that the vices from that past life could lead them to fall back into sin again. So they worry about their salvation, and that's perfect. And they can have an extra assurance of that salvation by receiving the scapular. So when we wear the scapular, we place ourselves, as I said, under Mary's protection, asking her to give us the grace to overcome our deficiencies in serving God. It's a recognition that we can only be saved by grace, and that Mary is God's chosen instrument to give us that grace. The scapular should also remind us to strive to be worthy children of Mary, for cooperation with grace is necessary. The scapular is a pledge of grace for us, but we still need to cooperate with that grace. We still need to strive. And this earnest striving will serve not only to obtain our salvation, but also to shorten our purgatory, to increase our enjoyment of the blessed vision of God for all eternity. Praise be Jesus and Mary.